stop trying to defend this nonsense. But that's the thing. It's like theology is ridiculous.
I can't thank all of you enough. If it weren't for you, this damn thing wouldn't be. So thank you to everyone who supports. Question from a Patreon member to you, Dr. Carrier. Keith Broad or Broad, I don't know proper, forgive me, but hey, thank you for being a supporter and asking the question. How did theology become a serious academic pursuit? While critical history has been seen as a fringe heretical pursuit. Is it possible to reconcile the two?
No. That's an easy one. Well, obviously the answer is that the Middle Ages, right? So like all the original universities were theology institutes. They were engines for creating theologians because they were controlled by the churches in doing this, right? So theology became kind of like the foundational basis for our education system, and consequently have maintained that that grip on the social status and respectability that Christianity really wants to support, right? Because this is all part of the plan of how Christianity controls everything and maintains respectability, is to maintain the respectability of theology, So like the thing is, like, if you were to finally wake up one day and admit that theology is just astrology with gods, right? Like if you imagine like how it would be if astrology was still a serious academic discipline, they had whole astrology PhD programs. We had journals, monographs on astrology. If we had journals on, astronomy that allowed like indiscriminately astrology and astronomy articles right next to each other, and everybody's taking them equally seriously. That's kind of where we are with theology. Theology it's astrology, right? Like it doesn't really belong anywhere. It's a discipline for studying something that doesn't exist. So it's like unicornology, right? Like, can you imagine like a serious unicorn? We're going to talk about theorize. How heavy could a unicorn be or not be? Could they be, like, how long could the horn be? And is there an existential reason why it has to have a horn? And, if you had this whole fucking academic discipline about arguing over what unicorns are like when there aren't any, right. That's what we're dealing with. And yeah, it's a false respectability. It's all based on social status and trying to maintain status by looking like you're a serious thing. And so like they produce correct academically formatted articles with footnotes and the correct academic language and all of that to appear as though they're doing something significant, but really it's silly. And I have an article on this, like why theology is ridiculous. You can go to my blog and look that up. And I give an example of this. It's like, this is really just kind of ridiculous. Like we should just have philosophy, and there shouldn't be philosophy. There should be philosophy of religion insofar as you have to study religion objectively, right? But there shouldn't be philosophy of religion as in we're actually taking seriously that these religions are true. Like that is actually should not be a part of it. Because the evidence is pretty overwhelming that they aren't true, like in terms of like standard objective academic standards. There isn't really any case to make. And so it's all apologetics. And of course, Christians will say, no, I disagree with you. I think we have like solid academic proofs for everything. And it's like, you really don't. It's all kind of, it's Oz behind the curtain. It's all song and dance, smoke and mirrors. It's not real. It's all contrived. It's designed to look real, but it isn't really. And it's just like as if we were having this conversation and astrologers were still dominant in astronomy departments. And they were arguing like, no, we have really good proofs that astrology is true. How dare you say we're a pseudo field? That's exactly the same conversation we'd be having.
It's funny, the way you just painted that made me think of the recent video I saw with Christopher Hitchens before he passed. And Sam Harris echoed this same motif, and that is, we're all atheists, all of us. He goes, you don't believe in, and then he lists the gods, right? Oh, but you believe one. Well, I'm just a consistent atheist, he says, right? And his point is that they're all fictive. They don't really exist. And it's funny because I could see the viewer watching right now at home on their phone. He's freaking wrong. No, but it's true. And it's like, let's talk about this. Let's talk about Islam. And then the Christian's like, oh yeah, that's false. That's obviously false.
Right. Yeah.
And they're like, I'm like, bro, but I can get another guy who believes some weird stuff. Look at yours, see the problems, or don't agree and can follow me on it. but because it's yours and there's some reason you can't get over the hurdle, it's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I think John Dominic Crossan or somebody said that they think theology is a 4-letter curse word. Dennis McDonald, that's
Yeah. Right.
he says it's a 4-letter curse word. He doesn't like it.
Yeah, no, I have the same attitude. I think it's a bogus field. It's a pseudoscience, and it's just one that just happens to have societal respect because it has this social status that's been generated by hundreds of years of Christian imperialism. Christianity really just still controls everything essentially, and so that's why it's got that status, and that's why there's a lot of status defense. Like like you mentioned, like when we start pointing out the emperor has no clothes, that this is a pseudoscience, there's outrage, like, how dare you, yada, yada, right? Like, that's all status defense, right? Like, they're trying to defend the bulwarks of their bogus field by getting indignant and using emotional arguments and ad hominem and all of that stuff. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
What would a hypothetical field of theology look like if we were talking about the ancient Greek writings? So if you were to
We have that. So yeah, we have lots of ancient theology. We've got Stoic theology, Aristotelian theology. There's a whole critique of theology in Sextus Empiricus, which is early 3rd century, and he has a whole book on theology. And his take is he's a skeptic, so he's like, and by that I mean a formal skeptic, like it's his philosophy. He goes and like basically summarizes the whole field of theology in his own day and criticizes it, right? So, well, this is dumb, here's why, yada, yada. But of course, the theology he's critiquing is all pagan. Right. So, so all of this stuff really started with the pagans. It wasn't originally Christian or Jewish.
So you imagine, like, because I feel like there's just like loss of ancient material on a grand scale. We have a lot, but people aren't educated to read that theology. So the Greek, let's just take the Greek, because I'm sure you can go into other worlds, other places, Hittite, Mesopotamia, whatever. Just in the Greek mythology, since you're an ancient historian and you know what they believed about this material, and you know what the educated elites critiqued about it. You know that they were picking this apart. And Christians are just inheriting that skepticism toward those gods, but then they have the superstition that arises of their own. And it's like, okay, so the question I have is for modern viewers, what does ancient Greek theology, not the criticism of it, but what are they postulating? And I want the viewer to consider if this was being taught in universities worldwide.
Well, I mean, there's a diversity of views, first of all, right? Just like today, right? But I'll give you 2 examples. One is in Stoic theology. There was a lot of talk, and we see this filter into Galen. So I talk about this in my book, The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire, where I get into like Galen's theology, because Galen talks some theology too. And he's a biologist and a physiologist, and so he did a lot of like some of the earliest irreducible complexity arguments for intelligent design. Like he wrote some of the earliest stuff on this, and he's doing real science to do this, right? But he had like worked out his own, like he talks about the theology of things like, well, God cannot, for his was empirical, right? Most ancient theology was empirical theology, not pie in the sky. So like modern theology starts with, these are the things we have to believe, and then they build rationalizations for it. Whereas ancient theology was, okay, here's what we observe, what then could be true theologically, right? So it's evidence first, conclusion later. So it's more scientific, less pseudoscientific, right? Whereas modern theology is all just rationalization of stupid ideas. But so, for example, he even talks about the Christians, and he says, like, the Christians think God can do anything, that he could just make a horse out of ashes. We look around, obviously God can't do that because he'd be doing that all the time, right? So God clearly must have limitations, and he goes for like mutations, like babies who are born deformed. He says, well, it happens like once every 1,000 births or something, which shows that God is not perfect. Like he drops the ball one every 1,000 times, right? Like, so your theology has to track the evidence rather than explaining away the evidence why it contradicts your theology. That's Christianity. But the pagan one is like, no, so this means God has certain limitations. He's not perfect, etc. And so God is trying to explain, well, how does God, like, Galen had this theory that's very close to the DNA theory, by the way, that a fetus, when it forms, has a tiny little, like, set of, not literal gears, but a set of mechanisms that is like what he would call, and did call, like a robotic theater. They had these robotic theaters at the time where you would, once you flip a switch, basically you have a big weight that falls, it pulls a cord, and that cord activates a bunch of gears and levers and stuff over time. So you get this theater box where you have all the actors come in, like robotic actors come in and perform all the actions, and a fire lights and goes out, and like it curtains roll, and like it does the whole fucking play.
That's awesome.
Through robots, right? But it's all just, once you set up all the things, it's like, I don't know what, there's a game like that where it's like Mousetrap, where you set up all of the pieces, and then once you hit the switch, it just, all the things happen in order because you've arranged it that way. And his theory was that there's something that we can't see, it's too small inside a fetus, that's that set of instructions that just automatically runs, and that's what builds the fetus in the womb. And that's because it's that mechanism. Like if one thing goes wrong, it all fucks up, just like a robotic theater. So like God clearly is not micromanaging the growth of the fetus. All he's doing is making sure that the program is set right. So that means God's power is very subtle. He can't do big things. He can only do little things. And so he has this whole theology, right, about this. And then he's the Stoic theology. This gets to the Stoic theology of the pneuma, the Holy Spirit,
Right.
Which actually bleeds into Paul. So like early Christian Holy Spirit theory is actually from Stoicism, possibly through Judaism. So they had a Holy Spirit theory too, but it's also very Stoic, probably the same influence. And the Stoic view is that the pneuma is an actual substance, very similar to what we'd call ether. So back in the day, 100, 200 years ago, we thought ether pervaded the cosmos and that light was a wave of ether, right? But we found that there's nothing, space is a vacuum and light is not a wave in the ether, etc. But we thought there was ether. And so there was like this, it's this ether, it's this gas that's everywhere and it permeates everything. And it's so subtle, so slight that you can't tell, you can't feel it, you can't see it. It's too small, right? But because it's so small, it permeates inside this, it's inside the floor, it's all the way through the earth, all the way through the heavens. It's this big pneuma. And that this is God's body, and it's through things interacting, bumping into the pneuma that allow God to, that's a sensory system. So that's how he can detect where things are and gain knowledge about the world. And then it's also his body. So like he could send cascades of physical action through the pneuma to make things happen, like adjust the programming, the microscopic programming in a fetus, right? And so that actually, so they have this elaborate scientific theory about God's ether body. And so it's not like a humanoid body. It's just like a gas that he can control the molecules of and send cascades.
The analogy I always heard was like, you can watch a wind blow over a tree. Something physical is doing it, but you can't see it.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, that's wind, that's pneuma. Or I've heard Litwa even bring up that back in those days, they always wondered how chickens were having eggs, but they weren't necessarily having sex. So why are they reproducing? The pneuma is impregnating him somehow. So you get this or
the Epicureans. The Epicureans have this wild theological theory that that dreams are literally the long distance television signals of aliens on other planets. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So that like when you sleep, you're like attuned, like you're quieting all your brain so it's able to receive these subtle radio signals, and you get these fuzzy dreams of the gods. So dreams of the gods are actually visions that literally they're visions. They don't know that they're inside your head. You just see the stuff that gets projected. It's just like a television signal. Like you can't talk back to them. They can't hear you. They're too far away, but you're seeing the images of them, right? So like gods to them are like aliens and other planets. So that's another one. And then we have like Plutarch goes into the theology of what he would call daimonia. Christians call demons, but the word in paganism was not specifically bad or good, right? So it just means sub-gods. So you think of sub-deities, lower deities. And he has this whole theory about like why they live in the air and not above the air, and why they're below the moon, but why they're above the earth, why you can't see them. What is the difference between good and bad daimonia? Like what makes that difference? And what is the range of their powers? So he's got this whole elaborate theory of these middle gods, right? And of course, like he talks about like some of the supreme gods started out as these little daimonia gods, these sub-gods, and get promoted through, like Osiris, his death and resurrection allows him to get promoted to a superior god. So he gets to live further up in the higher cosmos and as a real god, and not a sub-god or a minor god. Anyway, these are examples of the kind of weird theology that was actually existing within paganism at the time. And yeah, if people were publishing this seriously, like serious demonology, well, here's how demons live inside your body, and there's a limit. Only 10 can live inside your body because of, here's a diagram, like geometric diagram that entails the platonic solids, that there's only a limit to how many demons can occupy you. And here's the, here's the estimated mass of a demon. And, like if we had that, people would go, this is fucking lunacy. Why are we publishing this?
Right.
And so modern theology only avoids that realization by making its arguments so subtle and so convoluted and highfalutin that you don't realize how ridiculous it is, because it just looks like you've just been swimming in this air of, oh, of course God would be perfect or whatever, and like all powerful and have all knowledge in his head. And, so like, but then you start to think like, and I do this one, why theology is ridiculous, where you go into the weeds of this, is like, yeah, but that creates a lot of problems. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
And then when they realize it doesn't make a lot of sense, so then the theologians have to write these long books trying to explain away the problem that's been created.
Why is that a deformed child?
Right, and it's
God's perfect.
Right, and you get all this whole ridiculous thing. It was like, how can God have had an image of a lion in his head before he decided to create lions? Well, maybe there's a fundamental idea that equals all things, so that lions are actually also ants. And, like this kind of ridiculous sort of line of reasoning, like, come on, man, why are you even doing this? Can't you just walk away? Can't you realize you need to just walk away? Like, stop trying to defend this nonsense. But that's the thing. It's like, theology is ridiculous. It just feels less ridiculous because we're just so used to the current version of theology.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it.
I feel like current forms of theology, and correct me if I'm wrong, for the most part have been beat up by some of the modern falsifications that we've brought.
They've been chewed away, yeah.
And therefore they've pushed God further. They've made it more unfalsifiable in some respects.
No, that's a really good point. I like that you mentioned that. So that's why demonology has faded out of academia. Like, you don't have serious demonological articles anymore, because those are too ridiculous and it was too difficult to like do that with a straight face, right? And so what they do, but because they're being criticized, like they come up with an idea and it gets knocked down, like devastated, and so they have to come up with a convoluted fix and so on. But the trend is to get things to be unfalsifiable. So you're trying to create a model of God that nothing can refute, right? And what that does is create this kind of weird, highly abstract, obscure language kind of stuff where they're like talking about unity and simplicity, but they're not using those words the same way anybody else does. And, the language becomes just so convoluted and above normal discourse that you can't even follow it. Like, unless you're like in the guild of the fucking theology thing.
Yeah.
Like the average person just blanks out. It's like when you start doing math in a show, people blank out and leave, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. Like, the theology has gotten so highfalutin because they're trying so hard to make it immune to all evidence that it's gone to the stratosphere. It's just outside of everybody's lives, which is why most people can't really name an actual book of theology. Like, your average person on the street couldn't tell you much about theology because they're not really following it. All they've got is what their pastor tells them, which is more belief than theology, right?
And then we have systematic theology books, which are now like chained to systematize desperate books that don't have the same theology. And so they're juggling old theology, trying to interpret it through a modern theological filter. And older theology, technically has God saying, own them. No, kill the ones that aren't virgins. Nope, yep. And you're going, whoa. And they're going, that's not what it means. Or that was for that time. That was a dispensation.
The original theology was God likes the smell of blood. Like,
that's why he never fled again.
And you touched a pig and that made God angry, and you really need to like slaughter. You need to crush a pigeon alive so that he can smell that lovely blood.
And by the time Philo about the Zadric confront, he goes, no, the pigs, those are people who are acting like pigs. So it's a metaphor, it's allegory. They're doing all sorts of shit.
No, exactly. Anyway, that's how it works.
What it is, the Greeks, they allegorized the ugliness of their theology and stories over time.
Yeah, and well, there's an interesting question of what were the original mythographers doing,
right?
So like there's this, we got to prevent the sort of anachronistic assumption that's been driven into us by Christianity and Islam, which is this idea that the purpose of myth is to represent ideal versions of people. Like Jesus and Muhammad are supposed to be heroic, perfect models or whatever.
Right.
The saints are supposed to be perfect models that we're supposed to emulate or whatever. And that's actually weird. That's not normal through global history of theology. When people are doing mythography, that when they write Romulus killed Remus, they're not saying, yeah, fratricide is totally okay in this particular circumstance.
Right.
They're not saying he's a good guy. Like, that's not even the point of the myth, right? They're not saying, yeah, act like Romulus. That's not the fucking purpose of it. But then that becomes the question of what was the purpose of it? What is this signifying? What is this all about? And there's a lot of literature on this. It's really good. I mean, Dundas did a lot of good stuff on this in terms of what folklore is about. It really comes down to folklore. So if you get into folklore studies, like if you get into like fairy tales and urban legends, where like what are they really quote unquote about, right? How do they get generated? What are they for? Why are people attracted to them? Why do they keep getting repeated?
Yeah.
So they have like The Vanishing Hitchhiker is a book, short little book about folklore and specifically about urban legends. That goes into this. It talks about the evidence and how urban legends aren't really true, and if you follow them up, and how they evolve over time and change from district to district and so on. But it does get into like what is the actual psychological point of the story? Why did they construct it? And it's not to construct models of heroes. Like, that's not what it is. It's to do other things, to model realities. And those realities could be evil realities. It could be dark realities.
Yeah.
And so they're not, and they're model institutions also to question institutions.
Over time, though, they
Yeah.
use that, and they make more out of what isn't there.
Yeah, right, exactly. So anyway, by the time you get to theology, like, because the myths predate organized philosophy, right? So like formal philosophy comes later. Theology is then trying to like come up with an actual physical scientific theory of gods rather than taking seriously the myths, right? So the myths, they understood even then, or they're allegories. They represent things. They're not like, they would say like it isn't necessarily the case that Hercules existed. It's just he represents something. But there were also historicists. There were Hercules historicists who took it. It had like the Israel-Palestine conflict. Like, they had conflicts in the Peloponnesus that were based on the political beliefs that said like our people descended from one of the sons of Hercules when he conquered the Peloponnesus in that myth. Do you remember that happened? It's like, but that was a myth, right? So that you have people saying that was bullshit. That never happened. Right. And others saying, yes, it did. And we're descended from his sons, right?
Right.
So like you had like actual politics starts to get anchored to these myths. And that's where the literalists come in, right? But then like the higher like educated people are more like allegorists. They prefer the allegorical understanding of things.
And so like, yeah, our ancestor was Moses, and he founded this land and gave us the laws. This is our land, Abraham. You know,
yeah.
And someone comes along and goes, he didn't exist, dude.
Right. And that's a fighting word, right? Like, it didn't exist. What are you talking about? You mean then this isn't my land? Like, well, hold on, you can't say that. Yeah, so that's the problem.
Thank you.